know who I am?
Connor Fitzpatrick.
How are you? Sorry. So my name is Connor Fitzpatrick. I've been here for a little while, but not around so much often. I mostly teach classes now. I do some 50 shifts here and there. My day job, I wear a suit. I run a company that does big event medical services. So we do about 3,600 events a year. I'm personally responsible for about 15 million people across the country and the events that they work with. So some of the crazy things we do, Jim's been to some of our guys know what we do. But this is how I usually look at work, and some days I look like this. So it all depends on where we are in the country and what we're doing. But you know, who do we take care of? And these are the knuckleheads we take care of right here. My cohort I go to work with every single day. They're typically overindulging in certain things. When we talk about the synthetic drugs, they're usually overindulging. These are what's called headbangers. They're really just like hard dub kind of music. So we welcome them with our dinosaur welcome headbangers sign, as you can see. So
which one's Jim?
Yeah, Jim's on the far right.
Far right, you're in. Yes.
So it's a team of doctors. We're an event in Ohio, a team of doctors. We always have physicians on site for our big events. So kind of crazy stuff. This is also my normal Saturday night. Okay, so we collect about this many drugs on a typical night. On any given night at a big festival, we'll collect about 9 50-gallon drums. So fairly large quantities we're seizing. So I know a little bit of what we're talking about tonight. So this is kind of, you know, they say teach what you know, right? So this is kind of what I know. So we'll talk about 4 kinds of drugs tonight. What do you all know about of these 4? What's like the #1 thing all EMTs know in fact? The only one we know too, right? How many know what a cathinone is? Anyone know? Cool. Anyone know what a psychostimulant is? Kind of. Okay, maybe cannabinoid. Haven't heard of that one before? You've heard of cannabis, right? But not cannabinoid. Okay, big difference there. So, what's a cannabinoid? Let's look at this first one first. Okay, so K2, spice, all these things are supposed to be synthetic cannabis. Okay, so THC is the active ingredient in weed, marijuana, THC, cannabis. Okay, cannabinoids share no characteristics of cannabis. Okay, so some mad scientists in the lab came up with them trying to emulate cannabis. There's 0 chemical or pharmacological similarity. Okay, so the only thing the same is the name. Okay, so what can we see? You know, or what do we call them? You know, Spice, K2, Mr. Nice Guy. You've heard of these things. They're sold in like they used to be sold a lot in like drugstores or gas stations, some shady places we don't usually have in Darien. What do they cause? What can we see? Crazy stuff, right? So what do we typically see for like a patient who maybe has smoked a little marijuana? What would we expect? Is that what kind of category is that? They be super excited and agitated? No, right? They mellow, chilled out. We expect heart rate down, a little bit depressing. Okay. The opposite is true with K2 or a cannabinoid. We see heart rate increase, a little tachycardia, some weird ideations, muscle spasms, maybe some seizures there. Okay. And on the worst side, we'll see some excited delirium, maybe some cardiotoxicity, and ultimately hyperthermia, which leads to death. Okay, so these things can be super serious and pretty bad. We don't see it a lot in this part of the country level, but usually a little farther west or south. Okay. Notably though, and why I bring this to your attention is in 2013 there were very few calls on this across the country, about 3,000 documented. It's basically tripled since then. Okay, so we're seeing significantly more and more. We don't have data past 2015. What's a psychostimulant? The next category of drug we'll talk about. Anyone know what this is? Common ones? Without reading the last line.
Molly.
Yeah, Molly, ecstasy, MDMA, all the same thing. Okay. So what's our, what is it? What is ecstasy, or what's a psychostimulant? What do we see with that? Anyone know? Yes, could be hallucinogenic. Yep, that's one category of them. Almost always a methamphetamine derivative. Okay, so Molly, okay, is MDMA, which is methyl diethyl methamphetamine. Okay, so people think it's a party drug, a synthetic drug. It's just meth. Okay, it's just meth. All right. Easily obtained over the internet. Okay, so very easy to purchase, which is causing problems for us. Okay. Luckily, price has gone up a little recently, so we're seeing less and less of it. But why is this the number? Like, I am so concerned about psychostimulants. Why? Why is that a huge problem for the youth of America, future leaders? Where are we seeing most of our deaths from at large events and where people are taking these drugs? What's that? Heroin's an opiate. Yep.
Dehydration.
So dehydration is a good part, but what's the #1 cause? What's the #1 cause of death with these drugs? Hyperthermia. Thank you. Okay, so we're seeing what's hyperthermia mean? Too hot, right? So is hypothermia a good or a bad thing? We're talking comparatively to hyperthermia. Good, right? Totally good. So hot is bad, okay? So we're seeing kids routinely, okay, routinely, I'm talking, 8 or 10 per event we do, are presenting with rectal temperatures of 107, 108, 109, okay? What do we learn is really sort of our lethal limit? Like, what's causing brain damage? Yeah, 103, right? 104, really crazy case, right? So the body physically can't go higher than like 104, 105 without some sort of psychostimulant on board, okay? So when you're an EMT and someone said they've done Molly or you suspect psychostimulant use, what are we going to do as part of our normal vital signs? What's hugely important? Temperature, awesome, okay? And if it is 102, 103, what should you do as your treatment? Actively cool. How are we going to do that? Ice back where? Axillary, groin, back to the head, right? We're going to cool them down aggressively, okay? So we're going to pack them in ice as best we can, okay? So we're actually engaged right now in a phase 2 clinical trial with the FDA. We're working on a sort of I don't want to call it Narcan, but it's the only FDA soon-to-be approved treatment for reversal of hyperthermia from what we call psychostimulant drug-induced toxicity. Big mouthful, okay? So if you get to the scene and you see any of these things, right? Do you know what they took? You see this?
No.
You have no idea what they took, right? So people will tell you all the time, I did, whatever the pink Tesla of the day is, right? You have no idea what they took, okay? They'll tell you all they can. So what do we treat for drugs? What do we treat? How do we treat them? The same, we would say. Treat the symptoms, right? Exactly. So we're going to treat the symptoms, not what they're telling us, right? So if they said, I just did a bunch of Molly, and their temperature is 98.6, would you maybe, not believe them so much? Who knows? They don't even know what they did. They don't even know what they did too, okay? So just to familiarize, this is what they look like. They come in a million different tablets, capsules, powders, etc. Okay? And so what are you buying when you're buying drugs, right? You have no idea. You're buying from this guy, okay? You're buying from a guy in the basement. He has no idea what he's putting in them, okay? So you're really buying, from an illicit source, okay? You're buying from basement labs, all kinds of things. So it's really tough for us in the field to understand what people may have taken. Okay. So, on a side note, we often will do PSAs at big events. We'll play movies as they walk in, try to be fun and cool, but at the bottom line, we want to get everyone home safe. Okay. So, how do these drugs behave? Right. What do we see with opiates? We'll get to opiates in a second. What do we typically see? What's the action of an opiate? Depressant, exactly. CNS depressant. Okay. So we're going to see that last how long? Once you do heroin, what's kind of the method of action? Or how long will it take? Last. Anyone know? Depends on the dose, really dose dependent, okay? But it can be, an hour or two, okay? Problem with psychostimulants, we're looking at 3 or 4 hour window here, okay? And the peak effects are like an hour and a half after they take them. So the problem we see a lot, people will take a psychostimulant, right? Or take it, feel nothing. Okay? An hour and a half is a really long time. If you took your Advil for a headache, it took an hour and a half to work, what would you do? Take more Advil, right? So they're doing the same thing, okay? So we're seeing them, peaking, and the problem is the lethal dose with toxic window is very, very narrow, okay? And it causes some real problems here. We're seeing significant AMS, and we're seeing a lot of toxicity as a result, okay? Tachycardia, hypertension, seizures. These things don't sound so fun. We like to party, this doesn't sound so fun, okay? Panic attacks, agitation, hallucinations. None of this sounds exciting, right? You go to a concert, have a good time, not do this. So these are some of the self-injurious behaviors we've seen reported in a lot of case studies. Jumping out of windows to flee non-existent pursuers, requiring electric shocks and 8 responders to subdue them. We're big fans of ketamine for sedation. That's our personal choice. Repeatedly firing guns at windows at strangers who are not there. Does this sound like a fun time to you? It doesn't sound so fun to me. Walking into a river in January to look for a friend who wasn't there, and it goes on and on. Okay, so we see a lot of crazy stuff people do. Really bad stuff. Okay, so a lot of hallucinations going on. Self-ideas aren't right. Ripping through to be too quick here. What's a catheter? Who's ever heard of catheter before? Okay, so one of the 4 categories of a synthetic drug. No one is? Bonus points? Come on, someone must know. You've heard of it. It's not sold at Bath and Body Works. Bath salts. There you go. Okay, so bath salts is the catheter. Okay. So who's good at reading? Who wants to read this real quick tonight? Go for it. You're right.
One evening in April, Ethan Darby, a 24-year-old paramedic in Syracuse, responded to a call on the city's south side. unknown man down. Rolling up to the scene, he saw a figure lying motionless on the sidewalk. Darby raked his knuckles across the man's sternum to assess his level of consciousness. His eyelids fluttered. Inside the ambulance, Darby hooked him up to a heart monitor, and he jerked involuntarily. The odd reaction puzzled Darby. Why would the guy recoil from an electrode sticker, but not a sternal rub? The driver started for the hospital. Darby sat in the captain's chair in the back of the rig, typing on a laptop. Then he heard a sound no paramedic ever wants to hear, the click of a patient's shoulder harness unlatching. Swiveling around, he found himself eyeball to eyeball with this patient, who was now crouched on all fours on top of the stretcher, growling.
So this was in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's like the holy grail of medicine. So for this to be in there, we have a problem, I think, right? So they finished the story with this, if you wouldn't mind keep going.
That same evening, Heather Drake, a 29-year-old paramedic, responded to a call at an apartment complex on the west side. When she arrived, 4 firefighters were grappling with a 120-pound woman who was flailing and flinging vomit at anyone who came near her. A bystander shouted that the woman was high on spike, the prevailing local term for synthetic marijuana, which is more commonly known around the country as spice. But Drake didn't believe it. Spike didn't turn people into violent lunatics. Penicillinide,
Very good. Nice.
PCP, or synthetic caffeinates, bath salts could do that. Maybe even a joint soaked in formaldehyde, but not spiked. Drake sprayed a sedative up the woman's nose and loaded her into the ambulance. A mayday call from another crew came over the radio. In the background static of the transmission, Drake could hear Ethan Darby yelling.
Okay, so this was in Syracuse, New York, not too long ago, and it was crazy in the New England Journal of Medicine. Weird writing for the article, but it highlights the importance of it. So these patients, right? So we said bath salts were what kind of drug? Cathinone, and we said spike or K2 is what kind? A cannabinoid, right? Does this sound similar? Does this go back to the point where we don't know what they're taking?
Yeah.
No idea. Okay, so we're going to treat the symptoms as best we can, and most importantly, we're going to remain safe. Okay, so in all of these situations, we need to, patient safety close second to our own safety. Okay, so retreat and remain safe. Okay, who's heard of methadone before? Anyone know what this one is? Anyone heard of a cousin of methadone? Methadone. Okay, what's methadone used for? Drug addiction, right? So they prescribe it as a drug addiction, right? So methadone, okay, is a very close cousin of it, but the toxic window is so narrow, a few grains can kill you of it, okay? So what I'll show you, which is interesting here, is this is the chemical, who's in chemistry now? It's a sophomore year, right? So you know exactly what this is then, right? So, yeah, Jim, you're in chemistry now, right? So methadone, right, is this crazy compound, okay? Interestingly enough, okay, if you remove the oxygen, that's ecstasy, okay? So ecstasy, from a pharmacokinetic point of view, is actually a relatively, Nancy, thank you for saying this, a relatively safe drug, okay? As far as drugs go, very wide therapeutic value. They're using a lot of studies for actually PTSD. There is some scientific value being proved by the FDA, okay? The only difference between methadone, which has a very narrow toxic window, is this one little tiny oxygen, okay? So incredibly unstable molecules, yeah.
Is ecstasy Molly or
Same
no?
thing.
Different.
Same thing. Molly
thing.
is ecstasy. Yeah,
Okay.
Same thing. Molly is a pseudonym for ecstasy.
Okay.
Same exact thing. That's made famous with Miley Cyrus. Okay. So, any questions on that? Like that? Question. We can take more at the end. Sorry to rush through. Now, opioids, okay? What's an opiate versus an opioid? Anyone know the difference? Very simple semantics. What's an opioid? Man-made, okay? So we've created it, okay? It's made from an opiate, okay? Opiate is naturally occurring from what flower? Poppy, lovely flower, okay? So opioids, they report less of a euphoric high than maybe a psychostimulant, okay? And you'll see some more analgesic effects, okay? Oftentimes sold in mini Ziploc bags, and it's way more addictive than heroin, okay? Way more addictive, okay? So what are we seeing now in the streets? And that's kind of fentanyl. Have you ever heard of fentanyl before? Okay, so we see all these officer safety bulletins for fentanyl, okay? And why are we seeing it on more the recreational side so much? That's because they're cutting it, okay? So people will buy drugs and they'll mix it with fentanyl because you can take very little of it and make it incredibly more potent for what they think, right? It's actually more toxic, okay? So the three things we're looking at here, heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil, these are the fatal doses of each of them, okay? So you can see, this is literally a pinch of heroin, okay, is a fatal dose. Like 25 grains, individual grains of fentanyl will kill you, and carfentanil is 10,000 times more potent than fentanyl, okay? So they're compensating for a low-quality heroin, and they're introducing fentanyl. How do we treat this? Yeah, there we go. Also makes sense, right? So Narcan, okay? So Narcan, what it does, it binds to the mu receptor, okay? So what is it doing? Anyone know how Narcan's working in the brain or in the body?
It blocks the opioid receptor.
No, what?
It blocks the opioid receptor.
So when it blocks it, what's it taking the place of?
Cholesterol?
Which, right? So it's actually removing the heroin from the receptor, okay? So it's taking the physical place of the heroin, which is why it's so effective. So when we give Narcan, what are we expecting to see? What's the reaction? Yes, after we give it, right? They wake back up, they try to fight you, okay? Wasn't thinking there. So what's our dose of Narcan we're giving in the field? What's our standing order in the field? 4 milligrams. Right? How do we give that? 2 and 2, right? Okay. Sorry, 1 and 1. 1 and 1. So it's 2 total. Okay. So 1 and 1, right? We're switching to this one, I think, is the new one. Right?
The new one's a 4.
And it's just 1. Okay. We routinely will use 10 or 20 milligrams before we see anything at all. Okay. So what does that mean for EMS providers? If you give your 1 dose, right, and they don't wake up, is that it? We can go home? Absolutely not. Okay. Keep pumping them full of Narcan until that's where the medics come in or standing or online direction. Okay. But especially due to fentanyl, it's way higher potency, so a lot of Narcan is required for them. Okay. Who's ever heard of?
We can give 8 with that, and then medical drip.
Right. Even 8, though, may still be nowhere near, right? Nowhere near. Who's ever heard of Narcan bypass? Kind of like triple bypass, right? Not at all. No one's ever heard of this before? Very common in the Ohio, Middle America region. Okay. Hospitals are using so much Narcan, okay, from opiate issues that they're literally going on bypass. So EMS will have to bypass the hospital and they go on diversion simply because there's not enough Narcan in the county left. Okay. Does this sound like a good thing? Not so much. Yikes, right? Not great. So we talked about carfentanil before. It's a derivative of fentanyl, which is also a derivative of morphine, and it binds to the mu receptor again, which is where our Narcan comes in. Okay. It's an elephant tranquilizer. Okay, so it sounds like a fun party drug, right? Perfect. And it's 10,000 times more potent than morphine, which morphine's pretty strong stuff. And it's 100 times more potent than fentanyl. Okay? So this stuff is a killer. This is really lethal, right? We're regularly detecting this. When we test heroin samples, we're regularly detecting carfentanil in it. How much did I show you can kill you of carfentanil? Less than a grain. Okay, so less than a grain can kill you right away. Okay? Crazy strong stuff. Yeah.
Curious, how many instances have you seen in the field or read about the carfentanil, going through the gloves and penetrating the skin and going into the EMT or the paramedics?
So with appropriate protections, there are 0 documented cases. So don't be totally freaked out and alarmed. Wear your gloves. Do all your normal stuff. We've really documented no known cases of officer or EMS injury, which is a good thing. But I'll get to, let's table the rest of that. I'll get to why I'm concerned about it. So we said it's not approved for any human, unlike the other drugs I talked about, it's not approved for any human indication. There is no reason to have this. It's used for sedation of horses and elephants, oftentimes to lethal effects because of the dosing issues. And there's a lot of concerns for dosing of it, right? So what happens if it does get on your skin? How do we deal with this kind of stuff? We use hot water or cold water? Why? Exactly. So hot water would increase the blood flow, and that would be bad, right? So nice to use cold water, so good job. I asked the same question at EMS World. We had about 600 people listen to this lecture, and only like 5 people got it right. It was an incredibly concerning experience. I actually had to stop and take a glass of water. So where are we getting this stuff from? It's crazy. How are we getting who makes carfentanil? The Chinese do, right? So this is crazy. It was not a controlled substance in China until March 1st. What year, March 1st? Oh, that was last March 1st, right? That was this year, okay? So we're shipping it literally over the internet, totally legally, and getting it in the United States, okay? So the super fun stuff, all right? In 2016, we saw a massive rise in it being shipped as well. And then in June of that year, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police seized a 1 kilo box labeled printer accessories. They didn't find a lot of ink in there, I'll tell you that much. Okay? So how much is in that? That's 50 million lethal doses. Okay? So what's my concern to go back? I think we can use it as a chemical weapon. Is my ultimate concern with this stuff. So we're really concerned about aerosolizing it, putting it in the air, and it's been used in Russia as a nerve gas. Okay. The Russian, I think it was Ukraine they bombed. They put carfentanil on there and killed about 200 people. They did, good for them. They did arm the local EMS guys with a couple of vials of Narcan. Didn't do much for them. So, in the U.S. now, Secret Service is now carrying 2 vials of Narcan, not for you guys, for their own protection, as well as the FBI has just put it into service as well. So we're looking at this stuff pretty seriously and keeping a close eye on it. Sorry to rush through it, but get you out of here. Any questions on this? Yes.
I'm just going to say the most significant point of entry that we really should be concerned with is when you are aerosolizing them within the lock zone, that the Narcan, that if they have snorted any of it, it can be anywhere in your nasal cavity, and that's your point of contact. So if you're wearing gloves and very carefully disposing that syringe and all that equipment that is touching